Today's daf is Masechta Avodah Zarah daf Ayin, and we're just going to finish off a little bit from daf Samach Tes Amud Beis, about one, two, three, uh, 5 lines from the bottom, 6 lines from the bottom. We learned yesterday that if you leave a goy alone with a barrel of yayin esech, there's an opinion of Rab Shimon ben Gamliel that says that the wine is mutter, as even if you told the guy you're leaving for a long period of time, the wine is mutter as long as you returned before the guy had enough time to undo the seal of the top of the barrel and uh, forge a new seal and have it dry. Maybe that could take 2 hours or something like that. So therefore, this is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Gamaliel. But for enough time, if the Tanakama held, that's too long. The Tanakama held, we are afraid that the goy is going to puncture a hole into the top of the barrel, a quick hole, suck out some wine and make it yayin esech, and then cover the hole with a little lime and have it dry. So the Chacham said that is the problem uh, with leaving a guy alone for a wine with wine, and that shear might be even 15 minutes. If you tell him that you're leaving for an hour, two, and then 15 minutes, even if you come back 15 minutes later, 10 minutes, according to the Chachamim, the wine is awesome because the guy had time to make a little hole. But Rab Shimon Gamliel is not concerned about that. Goyim don't make little holes because they're going to be afraid that they're going to be caught. Because when you lift up the cover of the wine, you can see on the bottom that somebody tampered with the wine trying to make a hole. But to make a brand new cover, that's what we are afraid of. But says the Gemara, halacha question. The kavasi Rab Shimon Gamliel. Since we paskin like Rab Shimon Gamliel, the loichayish lishisume, that has no concern about the goy making a punctured hole. The hilchasa kavasi the Rabbi Lezer. We paskin like Rabbi Lezer, the loichayish liziyufe. To forge a Rabbi Lezer holes that a goyim are not going to be bothered to forge a whole new seal. That takes a lot of work. And we're not concerned about that. It's too much time. So therefore, based on this, one could leave a goy privately with a sealed barrel of wine, and it shouldn't be a problem. So the question is, why don't we leave wine in the hands of goyim? Since the goy is not going to uh, uh, forge a new seal. And says the Gemara, Mshum Shaycha. That's the 2 lines from the bottom. Because we're afraid that there is always a little hole in every barrel of wine where you can smell and sniff if the wine is still is good. And professionals smell through that hole. And we are afraid that he's going to widen that hole just enough to suck out some wine and and make the whole barrel yayin esech. That's why even today, we don't trust leaving goyim alone with sealed barrels of wine belonging to Hashem. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava, fascinating thing. Amar Rava, Rava says right now, Zoyna Goya, you have a Zoyna who's a Goya, right? She's a prostitute. And the Yisrom Mesubin Etzla. And there's Jews, eating with her. And nevertheless, so there's Jews are there to mimzana with her. Says the Gemara, if there's Jewish wine in the possession of the Jew, chamr shari, the wine is muta, because need the takaf lahu yitzra davera. It seems that the Yidden are going to do an avera with this gaita. Okay, we go to uh, daf ayin amad aleph. Okay, we're going to start from the top. Okay, yitzra the yayin loy takaf lahu. The strength of the Yetzer Hara of wine, they're not going to allow the goita to pour the wine for yayin esach. They're still going to protect the wine, protect the Jewish wine. Says the Gemara, Zoina Yisraelis. If you have a Jewish Zoina and a Jewish prostitute, and she's holding on to Jewish wine, the goyim is subim, and there's goyim around her, male goyim. So chamra asar, then the wine is asar. My tama. What's the reason? Maybe she could protect the wine and just do znus. Says the Gemara, hoyel bezila alaya. Since they cheapen her, they don't think much of her. Basrahi Grida. So she follows after the goyim, and she will allow the goyim to do yain nesach on the wine, and therefore the wine will remain asa. Says the Gemara, Ahu Besa, the Hava Yasser Bechamer de Yisrael. There was this home that had wine belonging to a Jew. Algai, Achta, and um, Algai, Ahadra, Achta, Ladasha Bape, Vahava Biza Bedasha. In other words, there was a guy that went into this house that had Jewish wine. Now the guy had rights to go into the house. He was an investor in this business, so he had a right to go into the wine. But then he closed the door. So now maybe the wine's not kosher, but there was a crack. Bizu badasha means there was a crack in the door, and you can view what the guy is doing. Let's say a peephole. We find the guy amongst the barrels of kosher wine. Marava, so Rava said, "Kol dahava bize shari." Anything that's in the view line of the crack of the peephole, that's permitted because the guy knows that you're watching over him. The high gisa, but the peripheral, the side view, where it's not in the view of the crack, osir, it would be osir. I would assume that in modern times, if you have a video camera, so then everything is mutter because the guy wouldn't do anything because knowing that you can watch over him the entire area. Says the Gemara another story. Ahu Chamer, there was this barrel of wine, the Haviyasa Bevesa Davadar Yisra Belyoina, the guy Betachtoina, that the Jew lived on top and the guy lived on the bottom. So the Jew could watch the guy on the bottom. Presumably, the Jewish wine is on the bottom floor. So if the guy would tamper with the wine, the Jew who has maybe a glass floor on the top can see what the guy is doing. But what happened was, Shama called Tigre, there was a commotion outside. Nafek Kadam, Nafki. So they all went out. So, right, so everybody in the house ran out. Perhaps there was a bomb siren. So then what happened was, when it was over, called the Masa guy. The guy came into the house first, and closed the door behind him. So now the question is, now the Yid's not in the house, so perhaps the wine is now Yain Esach. But Rava says, Chamr Shari, the wine is permitted. Why? Ema Amar, because the guy says he doesn't know if the Yid came in. Kihecha the Kadam Masoya Noah, the same way I came in early. That the Jew came and stayed on the top floor and he can see exactly what I'm doing. So therefore, the wine is permitted because the guy thinks that the Jew is still on the upstairs watching over him. Says the Gemara, Hahu Ishpiza. There was this inn, the Avyasa Bechamer di Yisrael, that was storing, let's say, in the garage of this inn, wine of a Jewish person. We found a guy, one of the waiters, let's say, who was going amongst the barrels. Rava said, "It nitvas olav kiganov." If you would catch the guy and he would say, "Oh," he would be nervous because he feels like he's stealing. Sorry, then the wine is permitted because we're going to assume that he didn't do anything because he's nervous about doing something less being caught. Veloy, if the guy is not afraid, let's say there's no police state over here and they abolished any misdemeanor arrests, so aser, then the wine is aser because he's not afraid of anything. Who Besa, there was this house, the Avyasa Bechamer, that wine was sitting there. Ishtachkech goy to have a kohen beidina. And all of a sudden a guy walked in and we find him walking amongst the barrels of wine. Rava said, Islay li ishtamute. If the guy has an excuse why he's in the house, let's say he could say he's a building inspector and he was told to come in here, so then Chamra Asa. Then the Chamra is Asa because he's not afraid to be alone, less being caught because he has a reason why he could always say why he's in this building. The Eli, but if he doesn't have a reason, Chamra Shari, then the wine is mutter because he's afraid to do anything. Says the Gemara, Meisvei, I'll ask you a question. Ninel hapindek oisha amalai shmar asar. If a man closed the door and left, and the guy is outside of the, let's say, the storehouse, then he could easily walk in, uh, and he knows the Jewish owner left for a while. Oisha amalai shmar. Or if the Jewish owner told the person, Shamar, I'm leaving. I want you to watch this storehouse with wine. Aser, the wine is aser. Because my love, would you say the wine is aser? Afa gav de lesle lishtamute, even if he had no excuse why he's in the house, why he's in the storehouse. And so we go very, very strict, even if he doesn't have an excuse to be in that storehouse. We're going to ask the wine. Why do you say that we need an excuse? If he had only if there's an excuse, if the guy has an excuse, the wine is also. If not, the wine is mutter. We're going to say that as long as you told the guy you're not going to be here for a while, no matter what, the wine is usher. And says the Gemara like. Now, when do we say in this price that the wine is usher? Is b'di'islay lishtamute. If the guy, if he would be caught in the storehouse, he has an excuse. He can say, "Oh, I heard a noise in the storehouse. I thought an animal broke in." So then he's not afraid to be in there by himself. So then the wine would be usher. But if he had absolute, if he would be caught, and you would see that he would have absolutely no excuse for being in the storehouse, then the wine would be permitted because he's not going to just do something and risk being caught. Ahu Yisrael, there was this Jew, a guy, the Jew and guy was sitting drinking wine. Shama Yisrael, the Jew heard Kal Salui Be Kanishta Kam Ba'azal. He heard the sound of the people gathering to daven. So he got up and left. And he, each one maybe was eating their own, they were not, eating together. Even each one brought their own lunch, let's say. And the Jew had wine for lunch. And he got up to go to the conference room where there's a minyan going on. Amar Rava, Chamer Shari, the wine is permitted. Because Meima Amar, because the guy says to himself, Ashta Mitkale Lakama Bahadase, that the Yid is going to come back. He was going to remember that he had wine, and he's going to come back and he's going to see, I'm taking his wine, drinking his wine, so he's not going to touch it. Says the Gemara, Hahu Yisrael, there was this Jew, the guy, the Havi Yasru Barba, that was sitting in a boat. Okay, in a boat that's docked. Shama Yisrael the Kasha period the Beis Shimsha. The Jew heard the sound of the shofar that it's Friday afternoon, and he wants to go to shul. He wants to spend the Shabbos in the city. And here, probably the guy knows that the Jew's not coming back the entire Saturday. Nafak, the Jew went for Azal. The Jew left on the boat some of his sealed wine. Rava said, Chamashari, the wine on the boat is mutter. Because the guy thinks that most Jews don't keep Shabbos. Neima Amma, the Joy says to himself, that the Jew is going to remember that he left wine on the boat, and he's going to come back to the boat. Maybe the guy is not concerned that he's going to come back because it's Shabbos. It's Shabbos, so the guy is thinking that the Jew is never going to come back on Shabbos to the boat. Amalit Isigura said that most goyim, Issa the Ger said that when I was a goy, ki havina ba'ar miyusan, when I was a goy, Amrina, we used to say Yehuda loy menatri Shabbos. Most Jews don't keep Shabbos. The e menatri Shabta, if Jews kept Shabbos, kamakisa kamishtache b'shucha. Wouldn't we find in the street wallets? The Jew comes Friday night, forgot to take his wallet out of his pants, so you drop it on the floor, and we look around the whole city. No, there's not one wallet. But the goyim don't know. The Sri Lanka Rabbi Yitzchak, we pascal like Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak said, "Hamaitzi kis b'Shabbos." If you find a wallet full of money on Shabbos, malichei pachas medalad amas, you can carry it home. Stopping every 4 amas. In other words, to protect that you shouldn't lose the money. So the bottom line is that the goyim, their thinking is that most Jews are not going to keep Shabbos. So the guy that sees the Jew leave the ship to spend Shabbos in the port city is thinking to himself that he's going to come back on Shabbos. He's not such a keeper of Shabbos, and he's not going to touch the wine. So that's why the wine remains mutter. Says the Gemara, who are you? There was this lion, that was roaring in the wine press. Shamagoy, so Goy heard that there's a lion somewhere, Hashem ben Dane, and he got scared and he started hiding amongst the wine barrels. Rava said, Chamashari, the wine is permitted. Why? Because he says, Ki the Tashina Ano, Itchibname Yisrael Achare, just like I'm hiding amongst the barrels. So the Jew also is hiding amongst the barrels. So therefore, he's not going to touch the wine. Sends the Gemara, Hanigam Vedis Uncle Pulpadisa, Upasako Chavisa Tuva. There were Ganovim that broke into Pumpadisa, and they probably broke into like a big storage house full of barrels of wine, and they opened up a lot of wine barrels, right? They opened up a lot of wine barrels. So it would seem that the Ganovim touched all the wine. Amarava Chamashari. He said the wine is mutter. My tama. What? What's the reason? Because Pumpatis is like Lahavdil Barapak. Ruba Ganava Yisrael Nidu. Most Ganavim are going to be Jews. And therefore they don't make Yayin Esach. So therefore the wines is permitted. Hava Uvde ben Nardoi. There was the same story in Nardoi. Now Nardoi was, most of the people living there was more of a cosmopolitan city with mostly Goyim. And they broke in, and there was a big break-in into the Jewish wine storage house with the wine barrels. From Shmuel, and Shmuel said, Chamra Shari, the wine is permitted. Come on, who is Shmuel going like? Reb Lezer, like Reb Lezer said, the Amma Reb Lezer, who we don't paskin like Reb Lezer, Suffolk Bia, if Tahar. The Reb Lezer says that if you don't know if the guy broke in, if you're not 100% sure, it's Tahar. Now we learned in the Mishnah, Hanichnas lebika, if someone goes into a bunch of fields, during the rainy season when most people are not walking amongst the fields, a bunch of different fields. And let's say, imagine there are 10 fields in front of you, and one of them, is full of graves. And he said, and the guy he says, I went amongst this valley, which is full of different fields belonging to different people. I don't know if I went into that particular field that had the graves or not. Reb Lezer says, Suffolk Bia Tar. Since you don't know your doubt if you walked in, so we assume that your tar, you didn't become Tamei Mace. Suffolk Maga Tamei. But if you said you went into the field, but you don't know if you touched the grave or you walked amongst the grave, you're not sure, then Tamei, we assume you're Tamei, because it's Rishus Yachid, and any suffix you have in Rishus Yachid, you're Tamei. So even though, so the story in Ardoi was that the goyim, somebody broke in. We come into the storage house full of wine, and we find all of a sudden we see that it's all open. And so how could it be that they're all open? So we assume that Ganovim broke in and opened up all the wine. It's not necessarily true. It could be that some worker came in and just opened up the wine, forgot to close it. So we don't know what happened. So since this is a suffix, if the Ganovim went in, the Goyish Ganovim went in or not, we're going to assume that the wine is kosher. But this is only if Shmuel held like this opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. When you're not sure if you went in, suffix bia, if you're not sure if you came in, you're going to assume you're going to go lenient. But Rabbi Lezer is not the one we paskin like. So what was the reason? So Gemara is searching for the real reason why Shmuel said those wines are tahar. There's an assumption that goyim, that really it was broken into by ganovim, and most of the ganovim in their hadoi are goyim. So why did Shmuel permit the wine? So the Gemara says, loy, last line. Shana Hasam over there is this different. Even the Ikir the Paschalushim have a sveka. Since really we're going to assume we don't know. So we have a double suffix over here, because since we see that there was a lot of wine barrels open, and some Ganovim are not interested just to steal wine or to make libations on wine. They're interested to find money, and they used to hide money in the wine barrels. So therefore, you have a double suffix. First of all, you have a suffix if the Ganav of Nehardoi was a Jew or a guy, because there's a strong population of Jews. So you can say there's a small percentage that the goy that broke in, that the Ganav that broke into the wine storage house was a Jew. And even if you want to say that he was a goy, maybe this person is not interested to make libations on the wine. He's interested to find money amongst the wine barrels or in the wine barrels. So that's why the wine, Shmuel said the wine is kosher still. Okay, let's continue to Amid Beis. Ayin Amid Beis. Says the Gemara, another story. He Revisa, there was this Goyish girl, Ishkachach Dahava Beitane, Dahavas Nikita Ufya Biode. We find this little baby girl, child Goy, that was found with froth in her hands, froth from wine in her hand. Now, there's two places where to get that froth. Either you open a barrel of wine and you take it out from there, or from the outside of the barrel, there is froth. So Amarava Chamrashari. Rava said the wine is permitted. Ema migabo dechave shekalte, that we're assuming that from the outside of the barrel, she took the froth, and therefore she didn't open the barrel to take the wine. Afagav the lake too. Even though we look at the outside of barrels, there's no more froth on the outside of the barrels. Maybe she found, we didn't notice it, she found some froth on the outside of the barrel, and um, therefore, that's where she got the froth, and she didn't get into the barrel. Says the Gemara, Hu Pulmusa, there was this general. The Solik Lenardar came into the Nardoi, and opened up a lot of wine. Yasser Avdimi Ama, when Avdimi came, Hava Kame Uvda Hava Kame Rabbi Elazar. A similar thing happened to Rabbi Elazar. Ushra, and he permitted the case. V'lo Yadam, and I didn't know. Imishum de Savalo Rabbi Elazar Damasafik Biatar, and I didn't know why Rabbi Elazar the Amoira was matter the wine. Maybe Rabbi Elazar the Amoira holds like Rabbi Eliezer the Ama Safik Bia Tahar. We don't know for sure that this general opened up the wines. We can assume, but it's not a guarantee. Nobody saw him walk into the wine um, storehouse. So therefore it's Tahar. Therefore, Rabbi Elazar said the wine in the storehouse, even though the lot of open barrels, we're going to say that it's still kosher. Or could be Mishum Desava, could be Rabbi Loza the Amoira said that this is kosher because Ruvi the Azli Bahadi Pulmosa Yisrael Ninu. Most Jews that go into becoming together with the Pulmus are Yisrael Ninu, are Jews. Therefore, it's Jews, and therefore we go to according to the majority, and there's not even a suffix. So most people that hang around the general are Jews. Ihachi have a suffix bia suffix magahu. If they're Jews, um, we don't know. It's not a suffix if they went in. We're assuming for sure that they went in. It's a suffix if they touch. So the answer is we don't know if they touched the wine. Answers the Gemara, since so many barrels were opened, that maybe they opened the barrels not to look to touch the wine. They're looking for money. And it's more similar to where we don't even know that the person came in. So that is, why we went lenient over here, because number one, there's many people that hang around this general are Jews anyway. They know where the head guy is. And anyway, and even if they came in and opened up all the barrels, since there were so many barrels open, the Keved de Maftach Tuva, we're going to say that we're assuming that they weren't looking for wine, they were looking for money, and therefore it's we go lenient, which is if we don't even know if they came in. Says the Gemara, Hu Marshavisa. There was a guy who sells wine in a shop. The Masra law iklida maftach. He gave the key to watch the key. He gave the key to be watched by Goyim. So can we assume that he's supposed to watch the key, that he's going to, like you give your key to your house to your next door neighbor, right? So let's say you gave the key to your house to your Goyish next door neighbor. So now is the wine also or not? It's very understood that even if you give him the key, you're only giving him to watch the key, so just in case you lose your key. But he knows he still has no right to enter the house and to the wine storage place, and therefore the wine is good. Amar Abaya said, "Afanana mitinina." Someone in a different scenario. Again, we've seen this, that the Gemara compares of Yain Esach to a person who, let's say, a Jew who wants to make sure that all his food is tahar. And there's a lot of amaratzim that are tummy, and we're afraid that the amaratzim are touching your food. If a person gives, let's say, his storage keys to an amaretz, taharais of taharis, then we can assume that the goy, the amaretz, didn't enter your storage house to touch the food. You only gave him to watch the key. So therefore, if we see by something as strict as taharis, where it's a suffix diraisa, we're going to say that the taharoisif remain tar. You don't have to worry about it; they're still tahar. So same thing by yayin nesach. Said the Gemara, hasha taharoisif taharos yayin nesach mibaya. Certainly by yayin nesach, we're not going to assume that the guy took the key and went in on his own and touched all your wine. Because even if he touches all your wine, remember, all this is a suffix derabanan, because we don't know if the guy is going to do an avodah zarah libation. That's like an extension of everything. So says the Gemara. Remember the teroisav. The Gemara just interrupts and says like this: Remember the teroisav aliyah miyayunesa. That taharis is stronger than yayinesa. In other words, just because we're lenient by yayinesa doesn't mean we're going to be lenient by taharis. So we're going to say taharis is always stronger. That's what Rav said, right? So, and yes, the itma, we're going to learn, like Rav is of that opinion. The itma, let's say you have a courtyard that has a low divider between them. And you have an amaretz on one side, or a guy on one side, and a Jew on the other side. Rav said, Taharoisif Tmeas, if you have taras, we're going to assume that they're tamei, because we're going to assume that the amaret stuck his hand over the small divider and touched your taharas, touched your food. But yayin nesa of a goy ain't yayin nesach. By a goy, it doesn't make your yayin nesach. So we go lenient by yayin nesach, but we're not going to go lenient by taharas. For Rabbi Yochanan said, "Af taharais of taharais." We're going to say we can even go lenient by food and say that your food remains tahar. We're not going to assume that the amaretz stuck his hand and touched your taharas and violated that small divider between you. Says the Gemara, Meisvei, let me ask you a question. A house where the inner room is rented by the chaver, by the Talmud Chacham, who eats taharis, but the outer chamber is where the amaretz lives, and he doesn't care about tuma and taharis. So that Talmud Chacham could put his fruits there and put his kalim there. But even if the hand of the amaretz could reach into the back room and touch the taharis remain tar. Ashir Rav. So this is a question of Rav. Rav says that the tahara should remain tamei, should become tamei, since the amaretz can sneak over and touch it. And this brisa says that the taharas are tahar. The chaver can spread his fruit there and no worries. Amalach Rav shan hasav shenit bas olav kaganav, because over there he could be caught as a crook, because the amaretz is in the outer chamber. What's he sticking his hand into the inner chamber? So he'd be caught as a ganav. Say, oh, therefore he's not going to do it. But if there's a tiny divider in between, he'll always have an excuse why he had to cross the divider. Maybe his son's baseball fell over the divider or whatever, and he messed around with your food. Therefore, by taharas, we're going to say that it's tamei. Tashma, come in here. Shimon ben Gamliel, Omer Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says, this is a proof to Rav. Gaga shel chaver l'malam mi gaga shel amaretz. You have two houses next to each other, and the roof of the house of the chaver is elevated more than the roof of the amaretz. So that chaver should be able to spread his fruits and put his kalim on his own roof. Uvilvad, because there's an elevation, as long as the Amoritz can't reach with his hand to the Chavir's roof. But if he could, then the Taharis would be Tame. He wouldn't be able to do that. Tashi Rabbi Yochanan says, whenever Chayish that a goy, that the Amoritz is going to reach over, Rabbi Yochanan says, even if there's a low divider, we're never going between the Amoritz and the Chaver, we're never going to assume that the Amoritz reached over. And here, this Brisa says we have to make sure that it's impossible for the Amoritz to reach over to the roof of the Chaver. Rabbi Yochanan says, tell you, Shadhasam over there, it's different. Because if there are two roofs close to each other, the Amoritz will have an excuse why he's on the Chaver's roof. I had to, I had to, my, I wanted to check the building code, or I had to measure something, and therefore I stretched out your hand. I stretched out to go onto your roof because I had to check something, maybe something from your roof falling on my roof. You know how it is. Uh, we have that where I work in Bushwick, where all the roofs are right near each other. You can jump from one roof to the next roof. Anyway, so therefore, the only way that the Haras would be Tahar is only if it would be impossible for the Amaras to get onto the roof, reach to the roof of the Chaver. Shema, come in here. Gagai shel Chaver b'tzad Gagai shel Amaretz. If they're all on the same level, the Chaver's roof and the Amaretz's roof, Oisa Chaver, this Talmud Chacham, Sheteach Shem Periaris, Umeniach Shem Keli, put his fruits and his kalim, and you consume that they're Torah. Even if the Amaretz could reach there, an Amaretz is not going to reach onto somebody else's roof. Tashi Rav. So this is a question of Rav. Here we're saying that the Amaretz will not reach into the Chaver's property. And Rav said that when there's a little divider in a courtyard, part belonging to the Amaretz, part belonging to the Chaver, we assume that the Amaretz is going to reach over into the Chaver's side and touch his food. So, Kasha Rav, so this is a question of Rav. Rav says, don't you see Rav Shimon Gamliel, who we said before, goes according to me? No, I hold like Rav Shimon Gamliel. Rav Shimon Gamliel said that the only way the covers kalim and fruits are going to be tar only if it's impossible for the chaver, for the Amaretz to reach onto the chaver's roof. So Rav says, I go like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Okay, we'll continue Be'ez Hashem tomorrow. Daf Ayin Aleph.